I never thought the sound of a garage door opening could change my life forever. It was such an ordinary thing, a hum, a creak, then silence. That was the last time I saw my wife, Claire, before everything fell apart. She had stepped outside to help the neighbor with his car. That was her excuse, anyway. James, the guy next door, was a mechanic. And apparently, Claire had taken a sudden, passionate interest in carburetors and oil changes. I should have been suspicious, but love makes fools of us all. She was gone longer than I expected. Hours passed, then days of late evenings and early morning spent in that garage. She always had an excuse. It's complicated, honey. James really needs help. And I, the trusting husband, let it go. Until 9 months later, when she gave birth to a child that was most certainly not mine. I remember standing in that hospital room, looking down at her. She was exhausted, sweaty, clutching that baby like it was a piece of her soul. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Something inside me turned cold. I didn't scream. I didn't ask who the father was. I didn't need to. I already knew. I walked out of that hospital, got into my car, and drove. The weight of betrayal sat heavy on my chest, but beneath it, something darker stirred. Claire had made her choices. Now, it was my turn. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove aimlessly, headlights cutting through the darkness, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind replayed every moment, the late nights at the garage, the whispered phone calls, the way Claire had started pulling away months ago. It had all been there, staring me in the face, and I had been too blind to see it. At some point, I found myself parked outside a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. I sat there for hours, watching as people came and went, nameless figures disappearing behind dimly lit doors. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to let her see me break. Claire had made me a fool, and fools had two choices. They could either weep, or they could act. At sunrise, I drove home. Claire was there, sitting in the living room, holding the baby. She looked up, startled, when she saw me. "You left," she said softly, as if she had any right to sound hurt. I didn't answer. "I was worried about you." Still, I said nothing. I walked past her, up the stairs, into our bedroom. The scent of her still clung to the sheets, but it didn't feel like ours anymore. I pulled a suitcase from the closet and packed. Clothes. A few essentials. My watch. The wedding ring I had taken off the night before. Claire appeared in the doorway, the baby now fussing in her arms. "What are you doing?" I zipped the suitcase and looked at her for the first time since the hospital. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but there was something else in her expression of fear. "Good. I need some time," I said. It wasn't a lie. I did need time. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to decide how much of Claire's life I was about to destroy. I walked past her, feeling her eyes burn into my back. As I reached the door, she whispered, "You're not even going to ask who the father is?" I paused, just for a second. Then I turned my head slightly and said, "I already know." Then I walked out, leaving her standing there, holding a child that wasn't mine, in a house that was no longer a home. She thought I was leaving to clear my head. She had no idea I was about to end her world. I didn't leave town. Claire thought I had, and I let her believe it. I needed her too. She needed to think I was somewhere licking my wounds, drowning in sorrow. She needed to believe I was weak. That was the only way this would work. Instead, I stayed at a motel 3 miles away, close enough to watch, to listen, to wait. The days passed in slow motion, each one feeding the fire inside me. My phone sat silent on the bedside table, buzzing occasionally with messages from Claire. "Where are you? Please talk to me. I need you." I never responded. I let her sit in her own guilt, let her wonder if I was ever coming back. I spent my time gathering information. I followed James, the so-called neighbor, and I saw the life he led, the easy smile, the way he walked without a care in the world, as if he hadn't just destroyed my family. He didn't seem worried, didn't seem to be looking over his shoulder. That was his mistake. He thought I was gone. He thought I was defeated. One night, I parked outside his house and waited. I wanted to see what kind of man he was when no one was watching. Around 10, the garage light flicked on, and there he was, shirtless, sweaty, wiping grease from his hands. He looked so normal, so painfully ordinary. How many nights had Claire stood in that very spot, looking at him the way she used to look at me? I gripped the steering wheel so hard I thought it might snap. Then, the front door opened. Claire stepped outside. She was holding the baby. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I watched as she walked toward him, the baby cradled in her arms. James turned, smiled, and took the child from her like it was the most natural thing in the world. I saw the way she looked at him, soft, familiar, the way a wife should look at her husband. That was when I knew. Claire hadn't just made a mistake. She hadn't just fallen into temptation. She had chosen him, and for that, she would pay. I returned home the next day. Claire looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Dark circles clung under her eyes, and her hair was a mess. She froze when she saw me standing in the doorway. As if I were a ghost she wasn't sure was real. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're back." I didn't answer. I just walked past her, setting my suitcase down in the hallway. She rushed toward me, reaching for my arm. "I thought you. Are you happy?" I cut her off. She blinked, confused. "What?" I turned to her, and for the first time, I let the ice in my voice seep through. "Are you happy, Claire? Is this what you wanted?" Tears welled in her eyes. I never wanted this. I didn't mean for it to happen." I laughed. Actually laughed. I could see how much it unsettled her, how much it scared her. "Good. Didn't mean for it to happen? Claire, you spent months sneaking off to that garage. Don't insult me by pretending it was an accident." She flinched. "Did you ever love me?" I asked, and my voice was so eerily calm it made her take a step back. "Of course I did," she whispered. "Then why?" She didn't have an answer. She just stood there, lips trembling, eyes darting to the baby still asleep in the bassinet by the couch. I followed her gaze. "He looks just like him," I murmured. Claire let out a shaky breath. "Please, don't do this. Don't make this harder than it already is." I turned my head slowly, staring at her like she was a stranger. "Harder," she swallowed. "I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But please, just say what you came here to say." I exhaled sharply and looked around the house. My house. It felt foreign now, tainted. I had built a life here, a future, and she had ripped it apart. I turned back to her. "I want a divorce." The words landed like a slap. Claire staggered, her breath hitching. "No," she whispered. I didn't say it again. I didn't need to. She stepped forward, shaking her head. "Please, we can fix this." "There is no fixing this, Claire." My voice was a blade cutting through the air. "You burned it to the ground." Tears streamed down her face. "I love you." "No, you don't," I said coldly. "You love this. You love the life I gave you. You love the security. But you don't love me." She sobbed, covering her mouth with her hands. I let her cry. I let her feel it. Then I delivered the final blow. "I'm taking everything." She looked up sharply. "What?" "I already met with a lawyer. The house. Mine. The cars. Mine. The money. Mine. You can pack a bag and go stay with James, since that's where you want to be anyway." Claire shook her head violently. No, you can't do that." I tilted my head. "Why not?" Because I made a mistake, but I'm still the mother of your child." Silence. Then I smiled. A slow, cruel smile. "No, Claire," I said softly. "You're the mother of James's child." Her face drained of color. She staggered, gripping the arm of the couch for support. "Please," she gasped. "You don't mean this." But I did. I meant every single word. Because love had made me a fool. And now, it was time for revenge. Claire was still standing there, frozen in shock, as if the weight of my words had physically struck her. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She clutched the edge of the couch like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I could see it in her eyes, the slow, dawning realization that I was serious, that I wasn't the same man who had kissed her forehead every morning, who had laughed with her in our kitchen, who had once called her the love of his life. That man was dead. She had killed him in that garage, and now she was standing face to face with what had crawled out of his grave. I won't let you do this," she finally choked out. "You can't just throw me out like some stranger." I tilted my head, studying her. "Stranger?" I repeated. "That's exactly what you are to me now." She took a shaky breath, her hands pressing against her chest, as if trying to keep herself from falling apart. "I made a mistake," she whispered, as if saying it softly enough would make it easier to forgive. "But we were happy once. That has to mean something." It did. It meant that I had wasted years of my life believing in a woman who never truly existed. I stepped closer, and she instinctively shrank back. Good. She should be afraid. "Tell me something, Claire," I said, my voice eerily calm. "When you were in that garage, when you were lying beneath him, did you ever think about me? Even once?" Her lips trembled, and for the first time, I saw true guilt flash across her face. Not just regret, but shame. That was all the answer I needed. I let the silence stretch between us, let her feel the weight of what she had done. Then, I walked past her, heading for the stairs. "Where are you going?" she called after me, panic rising in her voice. I didn't answer. I entered our bedroom, no, my bedroom now, and began pulling open drawers, grabbing clothes, papers, anything that mattered. Claire followed me, hovering in the doorway like a ghost. "Stop," she pleaded. "Please, just talk to me." I finally turned to face her. "Talk to you?" I echoed. "Like how you talked to me before sneaking off to be with him. Or how you talked to me every night after you'd spent hours with another man." She flinched. I leaned against the dresser, arms crossed, and studied her. "Tell me, Claire, when did it start?" She hesitated. I could see her struggling, weighing the cost of honesty. I already knew the answer, but I wanted to hear her say it. "A year ago," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "A year. 12 months. 365 days." That was how long she had been lying to my face. I felt a slow, burning rage coil in my chest. Not just because she had done it, but because she had continued to do it, day after day, night after night, knowing full well that she was shattering everything we had built together. "And the baby?" I asked, though I already knew the truth. She swallowed hard. "I don't know," she whispered. I thought, I hoped, but after he was born. I laughed, and the sound of it made her flinch again. "You hoped?" I repeated. "You hoped he was mine?" She nodded, her eyes pleading. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to fix this before it was too late. I stared at her, my amusement fading into something colder. "It's been too late, Claire." She shook her head desperately. No, it doesn't have to be. We can." "Stop." The single word cut through the air like a blade. She obeyed, her mouth snapping shut. I took a slow step toward her, and she stiffened. "You don't get to beg now," I said quietly. "You don't get to play the victim. You made your choice, Claire. You chose him. You chose this." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I never wanted to lose you." I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "You lost me the second you walked into that garage." She sobbed, pressing a hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. But I felt nothing. No pity. No sympathy. Just the hollow satisfaction of watching her crumble. She had broken me once. Now it was my turn. I walked past her, down the stairs, toward the front door. She followed in a panic, her breath coming in frantic gasps. "Where are you going?" she cried. "To see my lawyer," I said simply. Her face went pale. "No, please, don't do this." I opened the door. "You should start packing, Claire. You and your son, his son, won't be living here much longer." A strangled sound escaped her throat, somewhere between a sob and a scream. "He's still yours," she pleaded. "Even if he isn't by blood, he's still yours." I turned to face her one last time. "No, Claire," I said, my voice like ice. "He never was." And then I walked out. I didn't look back. I never would again. I drove in silence, the sound of the engine a dull hum beneath the weight of my thoughts. The sun was setting, casting an eerie orange glow over the city, but I barely noticed. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary, my jaw clenched so hard it ached. I wasn't just leaving Claire behind. I was leaving behind the last shred of the man I used to be. The trusting husband. The man who believed in love, in loyalty, in vows spoken under a canopy of white roses. That man was gone. Now, there was only purpose. The law office was quiet when I arrived. My attorney, Daniel Crow, had been expecting me. He was an older man, sharp-eyed and methodical, with a reputation for ruthlessness. That was why I had chosen him. I wasn't here to negotiate. I wasn't here to plead for fairness. I was here to win. He gestured for me to sit, flipping open a folder already prepared with my case. "I've gone over everything you sent me," he said, his voice level, professional. "You want the house, the assets, full financial control. And you want her out." "Yes." My voice didn't waver. He nodded, flipping through a few more pages. "She doesn't work. No independent income. She's financially dependent on you." He tapped his pen against the paper. "That works in your favor. You're the sole provider, the one who built this life. The courts don't take kindly to infidelity when one spouse sacrifices everything while the other," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "finds other ways to pass the time." My stomach twisted, but I kept my expression neutral. The last thing I needed was sympathy. "I want this to be fast," I said. "It will be. But I need to ask." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you want to do about the child?" I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair. That was the question, wasn't it? The boy had nothing to do with this. He hadn't asked to be born, hadn't chosen his parents. But every time I looked at him, all I would see was James. All I would see was Claire's betrayal, her choices, her lies. I don't want my name on that birth certificate, I finally said. I want a paternity test to confirm what we already know. Once it's proven, I want to be legally free of him. No rights, no responsibilities. He's not my son. Daniel nodded as if he had expected that answer. Understood. I looked him in the eye. And I want her to suffer. For the first time, he smiled. Claire didn't expect me to come home that night. I could see it in her face when I walked through the door, relief, maybe even a sliver of hope. She had convinced herself that I was calming down, that I would wake up tomorrow with a clearer head and find it in my heart to forgive her. She didn't know that I had already set everything in motion. I walked past her without a word, heading for the bedroom. She followed hesitantly, wringing her hands. Did you talk to someone? I stripped off my jacket and tossed it onto the bed before turning to face her. I did. Her breath hitched. And I filed. The color drained from her face. No. Yes. Tears welled in her eyes. We can fix this. I laughed, short and humorless. Fix what, Claire? You had a year to fix it. A year to come clean. A year to stop sneaking around, to stop lying to my face every single day. I took a slow step toward her, watching her shrink under my gaze. Did you ever plan to tell me? She shook her head, fresh tears spilling over. I was scared. Scared of what? I demanded. Scared of losing me? Or scared of losing this? I gestured around the room, the home I had built, the life I had given her. Because let's be honest, Claire, you didn't think you'd ever get caught. You thought you could have it all. A husband and a lover. Security and excitement. Until reality caught up with you. She was openly sobbing now, but I felt nothing. The sight of her tears did nothing but fuel the cold fire inside me. I'm not fighting you on custody, I continued. You can have him. He's yours, after all. I'll be removing my name from the birth certificate, and I won't be paying a dime in support. Her sobs turned into gasps. But he's just a baby. I stared at her. He's his baby. She crumpled to the floor, hugging herself as if trying to hold herself together. But I wasn't done yet. You need to start looking for somewhere else to live, I said, my voice cold, detached. You and James can figure that out together. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with panic. James he doesn't want, she stopped herself, but it was too late. I already knew. I smiled. So the man you threw away our marriage for doesn't want to play house with you? I shook my head. That's unfortunate. She broke completely then, wailing into her hands, shaking, her entire body trembling with grief. I watched, expressionless. Once, I would have done anything to protect her. Once, I would have held her and promised her everything would be okay. But that was before. That was when she was my wife. Now, she was nothing. I walked past her without another word, leaving her curled on the floor, drowning in the wreckage of her own making. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her quiet, broken sobs from the hallway. I had done what I needed to do. I had made my decision. And yet, as I lay there, the same thought kept circling in my mind. It wasn't enough. She hadn't suffered enough. Not yet. Claire barely moved the next morning. She sat curled up on the couch, eyes swollen and red, looking like she had barely slept. The baby lay in a bassinet nearby, oblivious to the storm unraveling around him. I stood at the doorway, watching, waiting. She finally looked up at me, her lips parting as if to say something, but no words came. Maybe she was afraid of what I would say next. Maybe she was just realizing that nothing she said would make a difference. Either way, I didn't care. I turned and walked into the kitchen, pouring myself a cup of coffee as if nothing had changed. In a way, it hadn't. This house was still mine. My life, my future, everything Claire had tried to steal from me, it was all still under my control. The only thing different was her. She was now nothing more than an intruder, a guest overstaying her welcome. She followed me hesitantly, standing at the edge of the kitchen like a wounded animal. She swallowed hard? Did you talk to a lawyer? I took a slow sip of my coffee before answering. Yes. Her hands trembled. And, I said, setting my mug down, you need to start packing. She sucked in a sharp breath. Please don't do this. Don't do what, Claire? I tilted my head. Don't hold you accountable? Don't take back everything you stole from me? She winced. I didn't steal anything. I laughed, low and bitter. Didn't you? I took a step toward her, and she backed up instinctively. You stole my trust. My peace. My future. You spent a year lying to my face, sneaking around with that thing next door, and now you want to pretend you're the victim. Tears welled in her eyes again. I'm not. I never wanted to hurt you. I scoffed. But you did. Over and over again. And now you don't want to face the consequences. She wiped at her face, her breath shaky. I'll leave, she whispered. If that's what you really want, I'll go. But please, don't do this to him. Her eyes flicked to the bassinet. He's innocent. I stared at the child for a long moment. He slept peacefully, tiny fists curled, completely unaware of the chaos surrounding him. He wasn't to blame for any of this. But he also wasn't mine. I already filed for a paternity test, I said. Once it confirms what we both know, I'll be removing my name from his birth certificate. Claire let out a choked sob. You don't have to. I do. I cut her off, my voice cold. I'm not raising another man's child. I'm not spending the next 18 years looking at his face and seeing him. She sobbed harder, her hands covering her mouth. But you're the only father he knows. I clenched my jaw. That's not my fault. Silence stretched between us. Heavy. Suffocating. Finally, Claire spoke again, her voice small and broken. Where am I supposed to go? I shrugged. Not my problem. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she thought she could cheat and still keep the version of me that had once loved her, the man who would have given her the world. But she had killed that man in a garage 1 year ago. Now, she was standing in front of the monster she had created. I walked past her, heading for the front door. You have a week, I said over my shoulder. After that, you're out. She fell to the floor in sobs, shaking, clutching herself as if she could hold together the pieces of her broken life. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Because this was only the beginning. I met with James that afternoon. He didn't know I was coming. He worked at his shop, wiping grease from his hands when he saw me step through the garage entrance. His face twisted in confusion, then wariness. He knew who I was. Of course, he did. He had spent a year helping my wife betray me. Hey, man, he said cautiously. Didn't expect to see you here. I smiled. It wasn't friendly. We need to talk. He glanced around as if expecting Claire to walk in behind me. Listen, man, I held up a hand. I don't want an apology. He blinked. You don't? No. I stepped closer. I want you to take responsibility. He frowned. I don't know what you mean. I tilted my head. You got my wife pregnant, James. That's your child. Not mine. His face paled. Claire said she said. She lied. I cut him off. Like she lied to me. And now you get to clean up the mess you made. He swallowed hard. What do you want? Simple. I crossed my arms. You take care of your son. You provide for him. You make sure Claire has a place to stay because she's not staying in my house anymore. James paled further. Wait. I never said it. I leaned in, voice low and lethal. You didn't have a problem sneaking into my garage to sleep with my wife. Now you can step up and be the man you pretended to be. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, looking like a trapped animal. I can't. You will, I said, or I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are. He hesitated, panic creeping into his features. I didn't give him a chance to argue. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in his own guilt, in the ruins of the life he had helped destroy. By the time I got home, Claire was still sitting on the floor, staring blankly ahead. She didn't even look up when I walked in. James will take care of you, I said. You won't be homeless. She flinched. You told him. He deserved to know. Tears ran silently down her cheeks. You're really going to make me leave? I met her gaze. Yes. She nodded slowly, like she was just now accepting the inevitable. Then, she wiped at her face and stood, looking at me with a broken kind of resignation. I deserve this, she whispered. Yes, I agreed. She let out a shaky breath. But do you? I frowned. What? She took a step closer, looking at me like she could still see the man I used to be. Do you deserve to carry this anger forever? Something inside me twisted. I don't feel anything for you anymore, I said. Not love. Not hate. Nothing. She swallowed hard. That's the worst thing you've ever said to me. I shrugged. Then you should have thought twice before stepping into that garage. And with that, I left her standing in the middle of a house that no longer belonged to her. Because Claire was right about one thing. She did deserve this. And I wasn't finished yet. Claire didn't fight me after that. She packed her things in silence, her movement slow, hollow. She wasn't the same woman she had been when I first confronted her. The defiance, the desperation to hold on, had drained from her eyes. Now, there was only resignation. I didn't care. She had a week, but she was gone in 4 days. I came home one evening to find the house empty, the last remnants of her life with me wiped away. A few boxes had been stacked by the door, things she hadn't taken, things she didn't want. I didn't bother looking through them. I carried them out to the curb and left them there. Let the neighbors pick through the scraps of my ruined marriage. She left a note on the kitchen counter. I almost didn't read it, but curiosity won out. I know I deserve this, but I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope, one day, you find peace. Please don't let what I did destroy you. I'm so sorry. I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. She didn't get to tell me how to heal. She didn't get to pretend that what she had done came from love. Love didn't lie. Love didn't sneak off in the middle of the night. Love didn't leave scars like this. I poured myself a drink, sat in my empty house, and let the silence settle in. For the first time in a long time, I was truly alone. And I didn't know if that was a good thing or not. Days turned into weeks. The divorce moved forward like clockwork, every document signed, every meeting with my lawyer another nail in the coffin of what used to be my life. The paternity test came back, confirming what I already knew. I wasn't the father. The finality of it should have given me peace. It didn't. James never reached out. I assumed Claire had told him what I said, that it was his problem now. Whether he stepped up or not, I didn't care. It wasn't my burden to carry anymore. People in town started talking. It was impossible not to notice the way neighbors whispered when I walked by, the sympathetic glances from people who had once been friends with both of us. It made me sick. The worst part? I missed her. Not her, exactly. Not the woman who had betrayed me, but the version of her I had loved. The woman I thought I had married. The one who used to laugh with me in the mornings, who used to fall asleep in my arms, who used to be mine. That woman had died in that garage, and I was still grieving her. One night, I drove past Claire's new apartment. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see if she had truly moved on. Maybe I wanted to see if she was happy. Maybe I just wanted proof that she was suffering. Her lights were on. Through the window, I saw her sitting on the couch, holding the baby in her arms. She looked exhausted, sad, alone. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel victory. I just felt tired. I left without knocking. Whatever Claire was going through now, it wasn't my concern. I had spent enough time carrying the weight of her choices. Now, it was time to carry my own. The divorce was finalized 2 months later. The house was mine. The accounts were mine. Everything was exactly as I had planned. Claire was nothing more than a memory. A mistake I had survived. People asked me if I would start dating again. If I would move on. But how do you move on from something like this? How do you trust again when the person you trusted most was the one who destroyed you? I didn't have an answer. One afternoon, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of Claire, holding the baby. On the back, a handwritten note. He still doesn't have a father. I stared at it for a long time. Then, I ripped it in half and threw it away. I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't the man who could be guilt, who could be manipulated, who could be broken again. I was the man who had walked away. And I never looked back.